Robert Kiyosaki's best-selling book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has inspired millions of readers to think differently about their money and wealth. In it, Kiyosaki shares the lessons he learned from his two fathers, one who was financially successful and the other one who struggled to make ends meet. And he explains how those lessons shaped his own approach to investing and building wealth. Today, I'm going to discuss 10 key investment lessons from Rich Dad, Poor Dad that could help you take control of your financial future. Now, regular listeners would know that we usually produce 2 shows a week, but in the month of January, I'm offering you the summer series, where there's going to be 3 shows each week. One to keep you up to date with what's happening in the markets, and 2 shows from our library that I think will be of interest to the many new subscribers who haven't listened to all the back episodes, and it'll also be of great benefit to regulars. And this is one of those shows where I have a chat with Mark Creedon. Now, if after listening to this show you believe you got benefit, may I please suggest you follow the show? Now, in the old days that was called subscribe, but because you don't pay anything, it's not really a subscription, it's just a follow. But every podcast app has a way of keeping up to date each time I bring a new show out, so please click that button. Now let's get on and learn a number of lessons inspired by Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that great book by Robert Kiyosaki. There are some must-read books in personal finance that will help you develop good savings and investing habits. And one of them is Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's a must-read if you want to learn about personal finance. Now, I've interviewed Robert 3 times on this podcast, and while I don't agree with many of his views on real estate, and I definitely don't agree on his views that we're heading into an economic Armageddon, I do respect the lessons I've learned from him many, many years ago on personal finance. So today, in this podcast with Mark Creedon, founder of Metropole's Business Accelerator Mastermind, I'd like to share with you, I think it's about 20 lessons that I believe you should understand from his great book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And at the end of today's show, I hope you're going to learn a few new things about money and finance, and that I will have reinforced a number of things you already knew. And maybe we can help you escape the vicious cycle of working hard your whole life. So welcome to today's show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect, and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now, here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Many people work hard but never seem to earn enough. They remain on what's called the rat race and never achieve financial independence. And the main reason this occurs is because people, they're not financially literate. They learn poor money habits from their parents or from those around them. And as they grow up, they then go to school, and the education system teaches them how to work for money. It doesn't teach them how to make money. Now, in the 1970s, Robert Kiyosaki wrote his best-selling book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and he showed his readers a way out of this, a way to get ahead financially. In his book, he says that the fundamental trouble with working for money is that a job's a short-term solution for a long-term problem. I guess that makes sense. People believe if they get a raise or get a new job, they're finally going to have enough. I guess that's happening at the moment with the great resignation as well, or swapping jobs. But that's not really the case. If you know how money works, you can get somewhere. But if you never know how money works, you can never have enough. Money alone won't solve the problems, according to Robert Kiyosaki. It'll actually give people more problems. People seem to be getting themselves into more and more debt. So what's his secret to financial independence? That's what I'm going to discuss in today's podcast with Mark Creedon, founder and CEO of Metropole's Business Accelerator Mastermind. And he's been coached to many successful Australian business people, professionals and entrepreneurs. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Michael. Good to be here.
Well, I know that you learned from Robert Kiyosaki, and I haven't. As I said in the first introduction, I don't agree with everything he says. And at the moment, he's been a real pessimist in a world where optimists do much better. And his views on real estate are different to mine. But I think his message about money is something that can be relevant to everybody.
I think it is, Michael. If you look at what Kiyosaki says about money and put aside whatever the disagreements may be on property, I think there's some really good basic lessons there that we can learn ourselves, and then of course teach our children and grandchildren and help them to get those lessons.
Well, I guess one of the ways that he talks about money is that the rich and the poor have different habits. And, Tom Corley and I have written a book about that as well. So there are some similarities. But Robert Kiyosaki says that the rich make their money work for them, which I guess is the opposite of what the average. Now, by the way, maybe we should say before we offend too many people that we're not judging rich and poor and good and bad. It's just a way of describing people who've got a level of financial fluency and others. But if we do think about it, the rich do know how to make their money work for themselves, while the average person, they just keep working for their money.
Well, that's right, Michael. I think, when Kiyosaki says that the rich don't work for their money, I think what he means by that is that they buy assets that generate income, don't they? I mean, probably one of the really important lessons that comes out of the book is exactly that, because he says, if you work for your money, then your mind will start thinking like an employee. But if you start thinking differently, you start thinking like a rich person.
Well, he tells them to build assets.
Yes.
Of course, most people don't know what assets are. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But it's a different way of thinking to the average Australian.
Well, it is. I think the interesting thing is when he talks about if you build your assets, then every dollar in that, if you're looking at this as a sort of a spreadsheet, every dollar in that asset column kind of becomes like a hardworking employee. So you're actually getting the money working for you, Michael.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And the problem is if your money isn't working for you and if your money's not making extra money while you're asleep, you'll never get rich because there's only so many hours you can work in a day, either as an employee or, Mark, I know a lot of people listening to this are business people and professionals, but how often do you see people on the rat race in the business world?
Yeah, all the time. And they think that if they can, Michael, we often talk about it's being a bit like on a treadmill. You think you can run faster, but you actually don't get any further ahead. The treadmill just keeps going. And eventually, of course, it throws you off the other end when you just can't keep up. So
have you ever been on a treadmill for half an hour, Mark, and realised it's only 6 minutes?
Sounds like me on a treadmill all the time, Michael.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I really got out of Kiyosaki, Michael, is that he says it's not, if we're talking about money, it's not how much money you make that matters. It's how much money you keep.
Yeah. And how hard you make it work.
Yeah.
Is the other thing as well. So I guess one of the things, the underlying fundamentals is you've got to get a financial education. That's one of the lessons Robert Kiyosaki teaches as well. And in many ways, that's an asset too, isn't it?
In fact, I think Michael Kiyosaki says that your financial education is your greatest asset. It's the single most powerful asset you have is your mind. And so if we train the mind well, it can actually create wealth for us by using it correctly.
Sure. But many people have learned bad money habits from their parents, from things they saw, things they heard, things they experienced as a child. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So therefore, the financial education most people get is get a good education, get a good job, work hard. I think the younger generation, the millennials, don't believe that as much anymore, do they?
No, I don't think they've bought into that same sort of methodology or that same theory that you and I certainly grew up with. Michael, it's probably a good point to raise this because one of the things that we see, particularly with professionals in private practice, is, their kind of defense is, but I'm an intelligent person. So, I solve problems, I get paid for it, I get money from that. But there's a vast difference, isn't there, between being an intelligent person and being a financially intelligent person?
Well, I call it financial literacy. So again, it maybe takes away the stigma of intelligent, not intelligent, smart, not smart. But some people are financially illiterate and some people are more literate. It's like learning actually it is like learning a new language.
Yeah, it is.
So you can be highly educated and be successful, but that doesn't mean you know how to speak Italian or French. And much the same, you may not know how to understand the language of money, tax, finance, property. I guess right at the beginning, he says, start your financial education, read books, listen to podcasts. But Mark, I'd be very careful who you choose as mentors. You've got to choose wisely because the booming times of the last couple of years have brought out a whole lot of, well, let's call them enthusiastic amateurs. There's one who I just saw recently on Instagram this morning, advising people how to buy multi-million-dollar properties, and he's 27.
Yeah. Yeah, Michael, it's the same in the business coaching game. I mean, I was just having a conversation with somebody then who's just joined our Mastermind program, and they were saying that they'd been working with a coach previously, and what they found out is that coach took a 6-week course. So they left uni, took a 6-week course, and became a coach. I mean, that's the problem. I think in boom markets, you do get those enthusiastic amateurs, and that's where you need to be very careful about where you get that advice from.
Well, currently we're going through a period that's going to challenge investors and business owners, a period of higher inflation, higher interest rates, possibly a recession, hope not. And you've got to actually deal with somebody who's had life experience, got the perspective to give advice to others, not somebody who's just read it theoretically. Because what happens is as life evolves, as business challenges come up, as property challenges come up, your emotions will get the better of you if you haven't actually lived through this before. The second, third, fourth time you go through a bad experience, the easier it is to work through, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's one of the things that Kiyosaki says actually is to actually be in control of your emotions, to don't let fear or opinions of the general public or even the media. And we're seeing a lot of that now, aren't we, with the media? You and I were just having this conversation on my drive home last night, in fact, about media spreading lots of doom and gloom stories because that's what sells airtime. And that's the product that they have to deal in.
Well, they had a really field day with coronavirus headlines for a while, and then the unfortunate situation overseas in Ukraine and Russia. So now they're looking for other things to scare us. So yes, don't let emotions control you. And I guess that's why it's important to have a plan, either a strategic property investment plan for your investments, or I know you do a business plan for businesses. But it's really difficult to make sound financial decisions unless you know what you want to achieve, unless you know your timeframes. And if you don't have a plan, when things tend to get rough, when the world gets difficult, and it's going to, you tend to default to what other people are doing, or as you said, what the media is telling you, or what other people are saying. So having a plan not only stops you from being swayed by emotions and fears, but it actually tells you what you should do. But I think more importantly, Mark, what you shouldn't do.
Yeah, so it certainly keeps us on track. And I think one of the things that Kiyosaki says, Michael, is that, when share prices decline, people get scared, they run away. If the local supermarket has a sale, people buy up big and buy as they can. So having that plan stops you being reactive and enables you to be a lot more proactive. And so you can take advantage of opportunities because you've actually made a plan for that, as opposed to just kind of knee-jerk reactions.
Well, I know at Metropole's Business Accelerator Mastermind, you build a business plan for our clients, but it's actually nowhere near as detailed as the property strategy plan, which often runs into 100 pages. But I think if you gave a business owner a 100-page business plan, or even a 20-page business plan, they wouldn't follow it.
No, we see people pull those off the wall, off the shelf, and blow dust off the top. So our business plan, unlike the property plan, it's only about 99 pages short of your 100-page plan. But the reality is, it's still a plan, and it's a plan which is really a roadmap. And again, having that plan, it helps you stop being swayed by emotions. You don't have to think about fear and greed when things get tough. You don't default to what other people are saying, what other people are doing. You've got a very clear roadmap for where you want to be.
I think the other difference between our strategic property plans or the wealth advisory plans, which are long-term, even though the business plan is to get somewhere in the long term, you do it in 90-day chunks, which is not the sort of thing you can really do in property or wealth.
No, it's not. Do you remember though, Michael? Do you remember the time when business plans used to be 10-year plans and 20-year plans?
Yeah.
And the reality is the market is changing that quickly. Technology is changing that quickly. Who would have thought that 2 years ago we would have the kind of staff labor shortages that we have now? Who would have thought we'd have the supply chain issues we have now? If we'd done a 10-year plan 10 years ago, it would be out of date already now. So we need to keep it in bite-sized chunks, and that's exactly how we map it out.
And similarly, in the property arena at Metropole, we review our clients usually on an annual basis, but I know you've actually got a much more intimate, I've got to use the word correctly, relationship with the clients of Business Accelerator Mastermind.
Yeah, absolutely. So we sit down every 6 weeks and work out where they're going and where they want to be, and just make sure that any plan that we've created for them is actually on track, that the 90-day plan is working. We just keep adjusting it to make sure that it meets change. And the reality is, Michael, we've got some changing markets now. So we're moving into some new
and
territory.
More challenges.
Absolutely. So what we want to do is double down, be prepared for those, get ready for them, and know that when they come up, they're not going to blindside us.
Now, getting back to Robert Kiyosaki, we got sidetracked on the stuff that we enjoy talking about, Mark. But one of his lessons is you should know the difference between assets and liabilities. And in his word, an asset is something that you puts money into your pocket, and a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. And he says that the rich acquire assets like shares and property investments, and the poor acquire liabilities, doodads, commitments and obligations.
Yeah, Michael, unfortunately, and you would see this in your experience, I've seen it in business, people tend to buy liabilities and they think they're assets. So they buy luxuries first. They buy big cars or big houses. And there's nothing wrong with having nice cars, Michael, is there?
No, not even two of them.
So, for those who don't know where Michael's bought himself a couple of Bentleys, but there's nothing wrong with that. You've earned that, and you wouldn't have gone and bought two Bentleys, 20 years ago.
No.
So you've waited till you've invested in your business.
I guess delayed gratification is important.
Absolutely. So yeah, basically understanding what is an asset and what is a liability, I think is one of the great basic lessons that comes out of Kiyosaki's work.
Now, one of the things that I disagree with Robert Kiyosaki is he says your home is not an asset. Now, remember, he's in America where the tax rules are different, and having an asset, in my mind, that grows in value as your home does, and that you can slowly pay off and use to equity to buy other investments, property, shares, whatever. I still see your home as an asset. But the basic fundamental is understand the difference between an asset and a liability. So I think that's a great lesson from him. I think one of the other lessons that comes out of his book is what you should do when you start work initially is work to acquire life skills, not for money. That's not what most young people go into the workforce, though, about.
No, they don't. So I think what he's saying is that you actually need to work to learn, as opposed to not working to earn. It's finding a job where you can earn the life skills, because, Michael, it's those life skills that's going to generate that long-term wealth for you.
Now, isn't it interesting, because we've recently in our Brisbane office employed a young guy who's done exactly that, hasn't he? And he's a fantastic employee.
Yeah, he is. And, he presented himself here at 20, Michael. He's got his own real estate license and essentially turned up and said, I'll do anything. I'm happy to be the office junior. I'll do whatever it takes. I want to learn more. In fact, Michael, the pay that he asked for, I'd be dragged out in the street and hung, drawn and quartered if I paid him that, and rightly so, because he obviously we've paid him the right amount of money, but he wasn't chasing the money. He was chasing the lessons that he could get from the experience here.
So the knowledge you're going to get from your job when you start off can provide you with unique skills, can improve you. That's one of the interesting lessons where Robert Kiyosaki talks about. So he says, early in life, you should learn about accounting and investing, markets, law, sales, marketing, leadership, writing, speaking, negotiating. It doesn't matter which business you're in. If you're wanting to one day become financially independent, you're going to have to invest. And we believe that should be in property. And for that reason, you should understand all those skills. Investment knowledge is really a fantastic asset to get. It's a great life skill.
Well, it is, Michael. And the thing about it is, unfortunately, I don't know that it's taught so much in school. I mean, these are the sort of life skills that, but let's just look at this. Kiyosaki says that it's not taught in school. We just spoke before about professionals in private practice. It's not really taught in university either. I mean, we have professionals come out, very, very good lawyers and doctors and accountants and very good at what they do, but they're not taught some of those basic life skills that actually lead them on that path to financial freedom, Michael.
I think the other thing that isn't taught is emotional intelligence, EQ, communication skills, people management skills, because if you're going to want to get somewhere in business in particular, you need to learn those skills.
Well, you do, because if you can understand people management skills and communication skills, then you get to actually know the right questions to ask from the right people, as opposed to, again, reacting to what everybody else is doing.
So how do you find that when you come across new clients at Business Accelerator Mastermind? How many business owners, professionals actually do have EQ and effective emotional intelligence?
It's probably the minority. It is one of the things that we talk about, how to help people to understand those communication skills. In fact, I was just having a conversation with somebody just this morning saying that ability to manage people using emotional intelligence is probably the toughest part of any management. But I think if you can get on top of that, that's going to put you on the right path. So it's very much an important part of what we work on.
Sure, because you can be a good scientist, you can be a good technician, even be a good plumber, but that doesn't mean that you can communicate with other people. And that's why I found, to be blunt, I wasn't years ago. And I used to be much more arrogant than I am now. And having a good coach, seeing my blind spots, teaching me, helping me, has gotten me into the position where I am. And to be transparent, you've been my business coach for over a decade now. But so that's really why it's important to have, in my mind, mentors and coaches and hang around the right people.
You're saying, Michael, that you can teach an old dog new tricks?
Wow, you taught me in my late 50s, in my 60s. So the answer is yes. But I think that's the other thing.
Yeah.
You have to be coachable, don't you?
Well, you do, but that the reality is everybody is coachable. And I remember having a conversation with a former colleague of yours about 10 years ago, and him saying to me,
I remember what you're going to say.
Him saying to me, the problem is I'm not coachable. And my answer was, you're right. It's like the old Henry Ford. If you think you're wrong or think you're right, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right, I should say.
So does that mean it's ego in some ways, that people say, I don't need a coach, I don't need a property advisor, I should be able to do it on my own because I'm smart?
I've always said to my kids, if we could just remove should from the vocabulary, in most cases, that would be fantastic. But yeah, it is ego. I don't need advice. I can do this all on my own. Despite the fact, Michael, that you watch them, and in fact, I can think of a couple of people that you and I know quite well. You watch them making the same mistakes time and time again, and you reach and you try and help. But yeah, I think ego, unfortunately, plays a part in that.
As we go back to the lessons from Rob Kiyosaki's great book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he tells us the rich are prepared to take risks, while the average person is scared to fail.
Yeah, Michael, that's right. He says that every rich person has lost money at some point, but many poor people have never lost a cent.
Now, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. But interestingly, though, just like the poor, the rich also have a fear of losing money. But the significant difference between the two is how they manage that fear. So, instead of being terrified and being frozen by that fear, they actually learn to deal with that fear, and they use that fear as inspiration as opposed to something that holds them back or defeats them.
So playing not to lose money means you're never going to make money. Winning means being unafraid to lose. Robert Kiyosaki teaches us not to be afraid of losing and to be bold enough to admit and learn from your failures. And I've often said on these podcasts, I'm a real success at failure. But he says it's the biggest secret of winners. It's the secret that losers don't know. The greatest secret is that failure inspires you to have another go. So it's not the loss that should be concerning you. It's okay, it's just another step forward.
Yeah, 100%. And certainly there's lots of examples. I mean, talk about Colonel Sanders. We can talk about Sylvester Stallone, if we're talking about sort of celebrities and all the various failures they've had. But each time they've got back up and worked toward getting a win. So the failure has actually been an inspiration to them, and they haven't taken defeat. Imagine if Sylvester Stallone had taken defeat, Michael. There'd be no Rocky movies.
Oh, well, I didn't see the last couple, but I saw the first few, and I did enjoy them. Yeah, he's done well, hasn't he?
Hasn't he?
Yeah. One of the other lessons from Robert Kiyosaki is learn to manage risk. And he says in his book that investment isn't risky. Not knowing the investment is risky. If you want to reduce risk, then increase your knowledge. Now, Mark, I often, when I'm discussing property development with clients, ask, is it risky? And they'll say yes. And I said, well, no, it's not to me. It is to you because you've never done one before. But at Metropole, we've done hundreds, probably, actually, we should count up one day to be into the thousands of medium density developments for clients. And I've done lots and lots and lots for myself. So doing a 2 townhouse or 5 townhouse development isn't risky for me. Now, if you ask me, is doing an apartment building risky? Well, I've only ever done one, and I sort of made money on that, but that was during the property boom of the 80s, and I wouldn't do it again now. So it's actually not the structure, what you're doing. It's actually the knowledge of, are you able to do it? And Mark, I assume it's much the same in business.
Yeah, it is. It is exactly the same. I mean, going into business is risky, absolutely. But going into business without knowing that it's risky, without understanding what the process is. So as Kiyosaki says, if you want to reduce the risk, then increase your knowledge. And I think the other point he makes too, Michael, is something we said before, is, you don't learn that in school or university or trade college or wherever, TAFE or wherever it may be. Unfortunately, that really comes from sitting with people who understand, have been there, walked the walk, and had that experience.
Well, you can take a shortcut by having the right people around you. It's impertinent to think that you can buy a property and have the same depth of knowledge of a local market than one of the buyer's agents at Metropole who's been a selling agent for 15 years beforehand and bought 100 properties in the last year or so. So that makes a difference too. Now, interestingly, Robert Kiyosaki encourages people to get into business. He suggests people start a business, but he doesn't suggest you leave your job initially, but you should maybe build a business on the side, because unless you do, you're going to be struggling all your life working for somebody else. So he says, start a business and grow it.
100%. And lots of the very successful people that we work with in Business Accelerator Mastermind have started their business as a side hustle. They've had a job, they've started a side hustle, they've improved that, they've worked on that, they've built that, they've been able to leave their job. So I think it's great advice. And I just think the concept of working for someone else is probably never going to get you to the level of financial freedom that having your own business will get you to.
Sure. Now, businesses aren't for everybody. Some people are not made to be business owners, and you can still become wealthy by getting a good job and investing. But in principle, if you invest in property, you should be treating your property investments as a business as well, and each of your properties as an employee. But if we're talking about the conventional sort of business, I know they're the sort of people you work with. I actually want to go through a couple more points, good points that I've learned from Robert Kiyosaki's book. But before we do, we keep talking about Metropole's Business Accelerator Mastermind. So why don't you explain to those who are listening to us today what exactly it is and what you do?
Well, Michael, what it is a business coaching program that helps service business owners and professionals in private practice to spend 45% less time in their business, earn 55% more income in 18 months or less.
That's a bold claim, Mark.
Well, it is a bold claim, but I can give you a list of all of the people in our program over the years who have achieved exactly that. So provided that that people follow the process, they work with us, and they implement as we move along. And by the way, it's a done with you program. So it's not a DIY, it's actually done with you. And provided they do that, then we know that works. We've got the systems and processes that are known, proven, and trusted, Michael.
Well, interestingly, you're my business coach, and when I saw how well you were doing things, I referred clients to you. I also encouraged you to coach other directors in the business and staff in the business. And when I saw how good it was, I wanted to be part of it for a number of years now. You and your wife, Caroline, and I have been business partners in Business Accelerator Mastermind. And I've been very proud of how it's helped a lot of business owners and professionals. And I know, as you said a moment ago, it's not here's a training program and watch it. You actually have a lot of involvement, as does Caroline, with the clients to make it work. But I think it's important to recognize that it's not for everybody. So who wouldn't you encourage to work with us at the moment?
Sure. So the program's not for people who are just thinking of starting a business. It's not for people who have just got they've got an idea. They've had an entrepreneurial idea, but they're still working in their job and thinking they might put this together. So it's not for brand new startups. It's really for people who are already in business, in service business or professionals practice, Michael, where the business is just too reliant on them. And they're at the point in time where they've achieved success, but they'd really love to be able to get the freedom without losing the money, that the reason they went into business in the first place. So they actually get to enjoy it as opposed to it being a bit of a rod on the back.
Now, I'll leave a link in the show notes on how to get to Mark, but if you go to metropolemastermind.com.au, you can have a chat with Mark and see if our Metropole's Business Accelerator Mastermind program would work for you. But let me make it clear that you promised that we could work, was it 40% less? Yet I'm actually working as much as when we first started. But having said that, I'm doing what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it, and with whom I want to do it. So I've actually chosen not to work less. So Pam gets up in the morning twice a week and plays golf. She gets up earlier than me. I'm sitting here doing my podcast, writing, doing the videos. So I'm actually doing the bits that I guess is in my flow. So you've taught me and given me the freedom to do that because I've chosen not to retire, not to slow down.
Yeah, that's right. So imagine if you can work 45% less in the stuff that you don't want to be working on, getting out of the operational, the day-to-day, and working on the stuff that is in your flow. What we call in Mastermind, we call your genius. We want to help people to identify what their genius is and spend a whole lot more time in that, but without sacrificing the income that they're getting out of the business.
Right. Well, one of the reasons you do it is because you should have a reason for doing it. So what Robert Kiyosaki says is everyone wants to be rich, but most of them don't want the struggle, the hassles, the problems of getting rich. So he says you've got to have a clear purpose in mind.
Yeah, you do. I mean, you have to know why it is that you're doing. This is so true in I think in life in general. You have to know why it is that you're doing what you're doing. But for many people, I think it's because they don't want to work all their life, or they don't want to have, that they want to have control over how they spend their time. Maybe they want to support their children. They want to give back to the community. And by the way, if we look at all of the people, Michael, that you and I work with across property, across wealth, across business, that pretty much describes the vast majority of the people. And we've done this exercise at Wealth Retreat in years past as well. It's interesting to understand what people's why is, but you do have to have clarity on what your why is.
And if you don't have a good reason, it's actually difficult to stay on the path, especially when all the challenges come. So I think another lesson, and that wasn't a Robert Kiyosaki one, but it actually fits in with this, is it's not your fault if you were born poor, but it's your fault if you die poor. So if you want to become rich, then you actually do have to delay gratification. You do have to learn to become financially dependent. You do have to get a business on the side, even if it's just a property business. You've got to do all these things that Robert Kiyosaki and all the other clever people tell you as well. And one of the other lessons you've got to do as part of the delayed gratification, Mark, is pay yourself first. If you can't get control of your own finances, then you're never going to be rich.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, Michael, because this is something that we talk to clients about a lot, about having to pay themselves first. And initially, it's something they struggle with because most people in business, they pay out all their bills, they pay everything they need to do, and they sort of accept the crumbs that are left. But each month, if you invest a certain amount of money into income generating assets, and I also think into educating yourself, into improving yourself, working with coaches, working with mentors, then if you come up short, what happens is there's a whole lot more pressure on you to inspire you to come up with innovative ways to get the money to pay those bills, as opposed to sort of going, oh, well, that's all that's left, so I guess that's what I get paid.
Now, interesting you mentioned about investing in yourself a moment ago, and I think that's important. You should invest in yourself, and you should invest in your future because you're going to be living there a long time. So as a property investor, we believe you should invest in working with our team at Metropole to build a strategic property plan and plan to become the person you plan to become. And it's actually much the same in Metropole's Business Accelerator Mastermind. You've actually got to spend money, invest money in getting the right coaches and the right systems in place. It's not an expense, really. I use the word incorrectly. It's an investment.
Absolutely, it is, and I think if you make that investment, again, you've got a motivation to achieve what you're looking to achieve, but you've also got that support, you've got that pathway, you've got a roadmap, and I think it's one of the things that we often see people do. And Michael, the reason why they make mistakes is because they're not prepared to actually invest in themselves. And gets back to something we said before about I don't need help, I know it all.
Well, if you want, Mark, if you want to use the same business coach I do, go to metropolemastermind.com.au, have a chat with Mark, see how he can help you, and I'll leave a link in the show notes. But Mark, I think having discussed all these things, there are some great financial lessons in Robert Kiyosaki's great book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And if you haven't read it, I really do recommend you do it. However, as I said, I don't agree with his views on residential real estate or that your home's not an asset. On the other hand, as I said, he's talking about property in the United States, which is very different to here. And don't be too scared with his views on Armageddon, but I've actually interviewed him 3 times for this podcast. I had a great video that had I think close to 100,000 views on YouTube now. And there's lots of information to gain from him. So you'll find an interesting question that Robert Kiyosaki poses to readers of his book. He says, wealth is a person's ability to survive so many number of days forward. Or if you stop working today, how long could you survive? So my question to you as a listener of Mark and me today is, how long could you survive if you stopped working today? Be honest with yourself. And if it's not long enough to make you comfortable, hey, it's time to do something about it. Thanks for your time today, Mark.
It's been a pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I'd like to share with you a provocative quote by the late actor and humanitarian Hugh O'Brien. And when I read it, I actually had to look at it twice because he said, I don't believe all people are born equal. He said, created equal in the eyes of God, yes, but physical and emotional differences, parental guidelines, varying environment, being in the right place at the right time, all these play a role in enhancing or limiting an individual's development. And he's right. He went on to say, but I do believe every man and woman, if given the opportunity and encouragement to recognise their potential, regardless of their background, has got the freedom to choose in our world. Will an individual be a taker or a giver in life? Will that person be satisfied merely to exist or seek a meaningful purpose? Will he or she dare to dream the impossible dream? And he finished off by saying, I believe every person is created as the steward of his or her own destiny with great power for a specific purpose, to share with others through service a reverence for life in the spirit of love. Well, interesting thoughts. So, no, we're not all born equal, but if you're listening to this in Australia or one of the other great countries that a lot of people listen to this podcast in, you've already won the lottery in life. You've won the lottery by being born at this time. Now, I know there are a lot of challenges going on in the world and probably in your life personally, but you have the opportunity, as Hugh O'Brien said, to decide your destiny. You're the steward of your future. So be the pilot of your life. Don't be a passenger just going on a ride. Thanks for spending the last 40 minutes or so with us. And if you got some benefit from the lessons that Mark and I were talking about with Robert Kiyosaki, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit from these lessons, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app down the bottom usually. Just send them this or tell them about it, or you can tell the world by leaving a review. Now, there's lots of other lessons in the past episodes of the Michael Yardney podcast. I think we've done about 400 shows now. So there's fun ones I do twice a month with Mark Creedon like this, or others as well. Why not listen to some of the old shows when you've got some time? They're each an individual lesson on their own. Now, I've got another way of you learning a bit more about money, property, success, finance. I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports for you. Why not go to podcastbonus.com.au, and you can pick up those special gifts I've got. Now, I'll be back again real soon, but you can catch me on social media in the meantime. Just look for Michael Yardney or go to the private Facebook group, my private Facebook group on Facebook, of course. Just look for the Property Update Facebook group, where every day I leave some tips, some tricks, something that I don't leave elsewhere that can help you. And as I said, I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favorite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?